Ash Meadow, and I'm going to provide 2 reviews of movies today and a brief description of the German Expressionism movement. The first movie is Metropolis, and the second is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. But first, on German Expressionism. So, German Expressionism was about, portraying really intense feelings, extreme feelings and emotions. It was very, mental. It was, about immersing the viewer in the perspective of a single person or people, characters, experiences of life, into their minds. And due to the state of Germany at the time, a lot of what they did express and the emotions they expressed were a lot of unrest and discomfort and spooky, rather disorienting stuff. These movies were subversive and oppositional to the status quo in ways that weren't always completely obvious also. When World War I ended in 1918, there were 130 German films that were made that year, and that was 2 years after foreign films were banned by the government, so it could only be German films. This is known as the Weimar period. The film industry grew because the government took over every single production company and created something called UFA, while the rest of Europe's industry was gutted to report on the war effort and the war itself for contemporary and historic audiences, which is why we have footage now of what happened so that it doesn't happen again. And as Hitler rose to power and was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, there were filmmakers that fled or exiled to the United States and countries like France. And in the case of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, that was not an UFA film or a UFA film. It was part of DECLA, which was a small film company that was competing against the government company. And they produced, the studio produced films with a rationing of lighting happening at the time, because there was a rationing of electricity, which contributed to the look of the film. Okay, so the first film was Metropolis. It is directed by Fritz Lang, and it was created in 1927, and it's an example of German Expressionism. So I'm going to do the plot after I talk about the characters. So here are the characters I'm going to describe. Joe Fredersen, Freder, Rotwang, Maria, the robot Maria, and the real Maria. So Joe Fredersen is a master of Metropolis. He works at the Tower of Babel. He's cold, he's calculating, he's a fascist, and he's ruinous to the city due to his pride and hubris simply because he was disobeyed. Freder is the son of Joe Fredersen. He begins with a chase, the story begins with him chasing a girl in the Eternal Gardens, but then he meets Maria after she comes to the upper level, and we'll talk about Maria later, and he's horrified by what he sees when he goes to the workers' city and the machine halls. He's kind of a lover boy type. He's green and a little naive about what he can accomplish regarding the oppression of the underclass at the beginning. And Maria has hopes that he'll be her mediator in this revolution that she's planned. And he has kind of a communist vibe, considering the children that he meets when Maria brings him to the service, and the other people downstairs and in the underworld, the workers' city, to be the children of his brothers and sisters. Rotwang is an inventor and kind of a lackey of Joe Fredersen, and he's in a small house that's been overlooked by the sentries. I believe the sentries are the police force. He's an inventor. He's friend of Joe Fredersen. He vied for the heart of Joe's dead wife, Hel, who died in childbirth, giving birth to Freder. And he tries to put her consciousness, what's left of her, into a robot, using both magic and science, it seems. He shows Joe the catacomb pulpit where Maria preaches, and kind of tries to play Joe to destroy the only thing that Joe got from Hell at the end, which was his son. And he kidnaps Maria and traps her because he turned the Hell robot into Maria's duplicate, and then traps her and kidnaps her and keeps her in his home while the robot Maria does salacious things in the Metropolis. So the real Maria is kind of a Madonna type character. When she arrives at the Eternal Gardens, she's juxtaposed against the women that are more lavishly dressed and made up. This is also emphasized by her priestess persona and the pulpit and the catacombs, in front of crosses and stuff. She's looking for a mediator to push forward her revolutionary agenda in the city of Metropolis, and Freder fits the role. She seems to love him though. She's not just using him. She's in love with chutzpah, probably. She makes a run for it when Wilfred kidnaps her, which is a valiant effort from somebody that's being very brave. She doesn't just give up and kidnap her. Not that anybody does, but she tries to put up a fight. It's presumed that she dies when her consciousness is thrown into the Hell robot. At least that's what I assumed. But I thought she was being combined with what was left of hell. But really, what happens is that it just steals her likeness and her charisma and stuff. And so she doesn't die, but she is held against her will in Rotwang's house. And her version of revolution is about mediation and incremental progress through coming to a mutual understanding of the Tower of Babel, that is the world that they have, upper and underclass alike, doesn't come to crashing to the ground. She's a little naive in that what can be accomplished, because the elite know what they're doing. It's not that they don't understand or don't speak the language, but it is more the everyday elite that don't know what's going on. So perhaps she does understand this and hopes to win the hearts and minds of the everyday metropolitan elite, while the elite at the very top know exactly what they're doing. The robot Maria looks like Maria, but it's actually a combination of what's left of hell and some of what Maria is in terms of her ability to command an audience. They make her into a showgirl in the upper level of city of Metropolis. It's presumed that it's at the I think Hall of the Suns is what it's called, or the Eternal Gardens. But either way, she entertains them and gets them into a frenzy. And the robot Maria eventually incites a revolution, but it's antithetical to the methodical revolution that's planned by the real Maria. I think the protagonist of the film is actually, contrary to the easier choice of Freder, is Maria. Maria wants the people of the worker city and the people of Metropolis to come together so that the metaphorical Tower of Babel doesn't fall. She seeks a mediator to mediate between the two, preaching that the necessity of such a person is required to avoid ruin, and she is patient and waiting for such a person, and then hopeful that the news of the preachings will reach Metropolis, I think, or some very talented member of the workers' city that can somehow make their way up to Metropolis. And that's why she shows them the children at the beginning, and says, "These are your brothers." She appeals to their sense of humanity. Appeals to the people of Metropolis' sense of humanity. In the end, there is a hint that she's successful in the beginning process of this revolution happens when Freder mediates between the representative of the people, who is the heart machine guardian and worker, and the master of Metropolis, who is Joe Fredersen. They have to shake hands. So there's a hint that she might be successful in her aim. In my opinion, the antagonist is Joe Fredersen. He's sought power and control over the city and over his son. And as a metaphor of all the sons of Metropolis and their minds. He was single-minded in his drive to maintain power and control, and even goes so far as to sabotage the workers' city, which sabotages the city of Metropolis as well, just because he, like many like many violent men, would prefer to destroy what cannot be controlled. If they can't control it, then nobody can. Have it, even. Is the opinion of some violent men. Many violent men are driven by that aim. So there's a reality check to him, though. The workers, the people, they can destroy the city of Metropolis. They do very much cause disarray, and they will destroy him if some power isn't ceded. So he does have to give up some of his power, and that happens in that brief scene with the mediation between the people's representative and him. So in a way, he does fail at his main goal of maintaining power and control by losing some power and control. The workers' city is dark and dingy. This overhead lighting that's man-made. It looks like an office building lighting, with the panels and the fluorescent light. It's bad. There's only machines in the catacombs that are represented, which emphasizes that the workers do very little outside of their 10-hour-a-day shifts, and exhausts them to the point there's no entertainment shown in the workers' city. Just the preaching of Maria. Then Metropolis is bright and stately and sunlit, and there's open skies, and there's towering buildings, and leisure activities are emphasized. The Hall of Suns, the Eternal Gardens, the Tower of Babel is the Capitol building there, and they're linked because the workers' city powers the upper world city of Metropolis. For me, I think the nexus of the film of the three mentioned, workers v. owners, man v. woman, technological progress v. technical trauma, workers v. owners is the one that I picked, though I prefer to phrase it overclass versus underclass. And I do think this also encompasses each nexus, including men versus women, because until the 70s in the United States, here, in this real world, women couldn't even take out a credit card without the permission of a man. So, and marriage has long been used as a tool to consolidate wealth between lineages. So, I think at the end of the day, the struggle of men versus women is an economic one as well. And technological progress via technological trauma, who benefits from technology and who doesn't? Who is most likely to benefit from new technological progress? and who's most likely to be traumatized by either the creation of it. Think like mining in like all parts of the world where they're exploited and enslaved to mine pieces of crystal for our laptops. Not that we shouldn't use our laptops, but like we should acknowledge where they're coming from. I think at the end of the day, a lot of struggles boil down to economics. And when they don't boil down to economics, they boil down to lineage, which feeds into economics, dynastic control of wealth and things like that. So this question of like whether Joe Fredersen was sheltering his son Freder from the situation of workers to be a good father, I don't think so. I wouldn't call what he does to Joe protecting his son either. I think he hides the underworld's worker city from his son because it's either to control the overclass or the sons of the city of Metropolis, and to continue on this like pattern of violence and power and control and oppression of the worker city if they don't even know what's going on in the worker city. If they're just like, oh, it's not that bad over there. But like if they see that it's that bad, then they're not separated from the reality of the people. So I don't think he's protecting him. I think he's protecting his bottom line. And it is very common for the elite to hide the reality of the world from their children, not because they're like so empathetic for their children, but because they don't want their children to change anything. But I will say, from the perspective of the overclass, he is parenting correctly, because the overclass doesn't want change to happen. So of course you hide your stuff, like the bad stuff, from your sons and daughters. But from my perspective as a member of the working class, Frederick is he's a bad patriarch. He's bad at like being a person, and that makes him a bad father. In terms of like whether this movie set a precedence for science fiction film, I think the movie sets the precedence that the book was based on, and the others around this period did as well. That there's an overclass elite that exploits the underclass. That how we conceptualize the description of reality matters. It's like in a way that either reinforces the false necessity of oppression, which is a falsehood, or resists that oppression, even subversively, in a way that like dog whistles to people with revolutionary spirit. Like I think that's a really common thing in science fiction. Like, do we describe reality to reinforce oppression, or do we describe reality in order to change it? Or describe an alternate reality that is very much like our reality to subvert expectations and subversively explain how to understand and undo oppression in our reality. And there's a lot of films that kind of borrow from the imagery. So like when Ratwing carries Maria to the top of the building, it reminds me of King Kong. There's also a lot of Doctor Who episodes and Star Trek episodes, the original series especially, that have similarities to this movie, Metropolis. The Hunger Games has a similar vibe, with the underclass being used and abused by the residents of the capital. The other districts are rather dreary, especially Katniss's, but the capital is like clean and bright and visually stunning, and there are people in elaborate dress, and they live lavishly and bacchanalistically. So a quick description. The movie starts with like showing the underclass changing shift in the city of the worker city, and then it shifts to showing the Club of the Suns, which is on the Metropolis' side, and all the men are there. There's like a foot race happening, and then they show the Eternal Gardens where the women of Metropolis are, at least some of them, and it's implied that it's a little bit like a brothel because they're heavily styled and like done up. There's like a chase and capture between Freder and one of the girls, but then he sees Maria with the children and visits the worker city to find her, and is horrified by what he sees. There's this really like intense scene where a machine explodes and there's a lot of steam, and then it turns into the mouth of a beastly mouth, and there are people that are being like, it reminds me of like the pyramids of Egypt, and like the builders of the pyramids of Egypt. There's people with like whips pushing them all into the mouth to be swallowed up by the machine, essentially. But then it turns into a regular factory, and then he confronts his father. Frederick confronts his father, Fredrickson, and asks him, "What if they rise up against you?" Josaphat, his father's right hand man, is fired by Joe Fredersen, and then later he's asked by Freder to be his like accomplice in his mission. So Freder returns to the worker city after confronting his father and tries to take over the machine, trades lives with somebody briefly, and then follows people to the catacombs after a ship to find Maria preaching about the story of the Temple of Babel, which is about like workers rising up because they couldn't understand each other. But I think who couldn't understand each other were the workers couldn't understand each other, the elite could understand each other, but they couldn't understand each other. The workers and the elite couldn't understand each other. But I really think it's like not just about understanding, but not wanting to understand. So they spoke the same language, but they couldn't understand each other. And then after this, Freder embraces Maria, they kiss, and then he leaves, and then Rotwag, the inventor, chases Maria through the catacombs and kidnaps her after she makes a really valiant effort at like avoiding capture. And like Freder was gonna meet her at the cathedral, but doesn't find her there, and so he prays sort of to the 7 statues of the 7 deadly sins and to death. And at the same time, Rotwag turns Maria into a robot, and it's implied that he murders her that way. At the same time, a detective confronts the person that he swaps places with and tells him to go back to his machine, and then finds out that Josephat's involved, and he's confronted and has to go to the underclass, the undercity, to be a worker. Freder is walking through the streets looking for Maria and hears her screaming in Rotwag's house, and the door's open to him, but he can't get to the others inside. He finds a piece of her dress, and Rotwag sees and says, like, she's with your father. So she is, but it's not her. It's the robot version of her. Because what actually happens is she doesn't die when the robot is made. Her likeness is stolen and creates the robot. And so Freder, when he sees this, falls into like a psychedelic fit and passes out, and then wakes after having this really like intense hallucination about the 7 deadly sins becoming animated and death descending on the city, and a lot of like apocalyptic preachings coming back to him. So Josephat visits Freder from the worker city and gives him news, while Maria's robot has taken to becoming very salacious for the Metropolitan elite and stirs the menfolk of Metropolis into a frenzy. And then it turns out Maria's actually alive. She's being kidnapped and kept by Rotwag in his house. So then the robot Maria uses what she's done, established with the rapport she's established with the Metropolitan men, to stir up like their passions and whatever, and that's how she learns how to stir up the aggressive passions of the underclass men in the worker city, and like starts them in a doomed revolution, is what it feels like, that pales in comparison to the mediated one that the original Maria was hoping to preaching for. But one might argue that the more violent revolution that happens, where it's not really violent it's violent to people, but it's not directly violent to people, is necessary so that the non-violent revolution can happen. So the elevators, the workers storm the city of Metropolis after storming the machine works and the heart machine, and there's like a guardian of the heart machine. He becomes their like representative at a certain point, and the gates are opened by Joe Frederson's demand to the heart machine, because he wants to destroy the underworld, not thinking about how it's going to destroy the city of Metropolis. So his quiet rage doesn't seem to like comprehend that he's bringing ruin to himself. The elevators break first, which leave very few ways out. It funnels people through like a little door, and like all the people, all the adults of the upper class, of the underclass of the worker city already made their way up to the surface, so they leave behind their children. So the children all flood to the main area of the city, and Maria tries to help them not drown, because then the water starts to flood the city, the underworld city, the worker city. So Freder finds her too, and they both, him and Josephat, they all three help the children out. They plan to take them to the Club of the Suns, but then they see the electricity is out. And Joe is like, where's my son? Like, seems like a little too late to care about that. But then the heart machine guardian asks the workers, where are your children, which is a little different, because they like are looking for a better life for their children, which is why they're doing what they're doing. So then the workers want to murder Maria for like creating the frenzy that caused them to destroy the heart machine and maybe kill their children. And she's chased to her, hopefully not doom, but she's chased again. And then at the same time, the robot Maria creates a parade of people that she's like got all rambunctious and stuff. And so the parade and the march intersect, and the robot Maria is burned at the stake in a large pyre that they create, where and then the real Maria is chased by Rotwag again, who wants to like use her again or something. God knows what Rotwag's goal is at the end. watching the world burn, you know. He carries her on top of a building after like fighting with Freder a little bit, and then ends up after some fighting and tussle between Freder and Rotwing falls off the building to his death. And then Maria and Freder embrace, and then the people of the city march to the Tower of Babel and confront Joe Fredersen. They know that their kids are alive now. And with the guardian of the Heart Machine as their mouthpiece, Freder attempts to mediate between his father, Joe Fredersen, and the Heart Machine Guardian, and forces him to join hands, and then the movie ends. For Metropolis, I would say thumbs up. I thought it was a decent movie. It was good. Foundational. The sets were really interesting. So, thumbs up. So, the next movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, was directed by Robert Wein in 1920. It's also part of the German Expressionist movement. I'm also going to mention the characters again, and then some of the other things, and then get to the plot. So, Cesare is the somnambulist or the sleepwalker in the story. He's 23 years old. He slept for 23 years, is what Dr. Caligari says, and he's awakened for the first time in his life in a festival, is what is claimed by Dr. Caligari. Alan is a friend of Mr. Francis, who encourages him to go to the fair, and he's murdered about 25 minutes into the hour-long film. Mr. Francis is the main character in a lot of ways. So Dr. Caligari, he's an old man. He's like shifty and fidgety. He wears his glasses all discombobulated. They're like all over the place in some shots. Jane is like a very pretty girl. There seems to be a love triangle between Mr. Francis and Mr. Allen, as is evidenced by at the very beginning. Mr. Francis, when he's walking home up from the festival with Alan, says, "Whoever she chooses, we shall remain friends. Whoever she chooses, we shall remain friends," he says. So, later Jane is reading a book and worried about her father, Dr. Olson, who hasn't returned home yet, and rather bravely goes looking for him, and then meets Dr. Caligari and Cesare. After Dr. Caligari loses her tent, she runs away. She's afraid of Cesare. She almost gets murdered by Cesare, but ends up surviving. The protagonist, again, I think it's Mr. Francis or Francis. His goal is to expose the director of the asylum as the violent Dr. Caligari, but he does not succeed. And the antagonist is very much Dr. Caligari, who is at worst had the goal of murdering people through influencing a sleepwalker named Cesare, and at best, which still isn't very good, he is the director of an insane asylum, or an asylum rather, during a period of time when asylums were known for their brutality against mentally ill people and neurodivergent people. So he succeeds in being evil regardless of whichever narrative is true. Some of the things that make the expressionist setting of Caligari feel like just uncomfortable and uncanny and haunted are like the vignette like frames, and the way that they create tunnel vision in a lot of the scenes that kind of like trap you and make me feel kind of claustrophobic. The jaunted angles of the backdrops are really disorienting and like kind of trippy and off-kilter and unrealistic, which makes everything feel sideways. The way that the paper strokes are in some of the sets are like one might see from somebody that's either on a psychedelic trip or in some sort of episode that could be diagnosed as psychosis. There's like a really disorienting psychedelic vibe to it. The rotating tents at the fair made things feel really wonky. The sepia tone and the way it's shot in low light at a lot of scenes are like the dark blues, and the pinks for Jane's scenes are kind of pretty, but it was shot that way in low light too, and like with these colors because there was electricity rations, like I mentioned, which made everything feel like really dreary even in the daytime scenes. The dark foreground in the tent near the beginning with Dr. Caligari and Cesare, they're very packed and barely lit, which also feels very claustrophobic. The blue-green nighttime scene stage feels like walking through a forest of overhang in the mesoground. There doesn't seem to be a bed in Dr. Caligari's wagon. He just sleeps sitting upright, which is weird. The crosses are all wonky and misshapen, and the angles of everything feel very like sharp and like there's danger happening. So everything's just really eerie because of the visuals. So Dr. Caligari rather first. He represents, he's a hypnotist and fits his narrative, and he's sound director in the real world narrative. And he represents the German war government and the way the government incited sleepwalking citizens of Germany to commit evil and acts of violence and to hurt each other. Cesare represents the everyday citizen of Germany that went along with the violence without questioning it, without using their reason, because like the way that the sleepwalker goes through the motions without like thinking about what they're doing because they're sleepwalking and they're not consciously aware of what they're doing. Though that's kind of giving the populace a little bit of like credit where maybe it's not due. It is this populace, the same German populace that was sleepwalking during World War I, that supported the resident obedience to Hitler. So yeah, there's also an unreliable narrator. The first time that I knew there was before I even watched it. I knew what was going to happen. I knew what the ending was, and that there was an unreliable narrator type thing happening. But it was rather apparent to me with a flat affect of the woman that walks through, of Jane, as she walks through the garden. There's like a flat affect that's very common in psychiatric patients that are over medicated. And another movie where there's like a modern movie where there's an unreliable narrator that's similar is Fight Club. This like milk toast boy man meets like this like fast talking politically charged guy named Tyler Durden and credits him with helping him become like an economic political radical while his cookie cutter life falls apart around him. But it turns out that he's the same person as the narrator. Like Tyler Durden doesn't exist, or rather the narrator is Tyler Durden or some combination thereof. In terms of like other movies that have similar themes or images or ideas in the modern era, I'd say A Beautiful Mind, Shutter Island, Inception, and the visual aspect of the Batman in that version, of the Penguin in that version of the Batman that has poison ivy in it. I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but definitely very similar, as the video essay showed. So a really quick synopsis of the story. There's two men on a bench, a woman walks by, they're talking, then they show Mr. Francis reading his book, and then Alan shows up and they're like, let's go to the fair, and then a man with a cane keeps walking through the narrow streets of the town hall warning people, he's going out to go into the clerk's office because the clerk isn't having a good day, but he waits and he's rocking a little bit while he's waiting, and asks for a fare to exhibit a spectacle, a somnambulist, or a sleepwalker. And later that night the town clerk is killed in a stabbing. Then Cesare is claimed to be awakened for the first time from his death-like trance and is immediately Q&A'd by the audience. And Dr. Caligari's tent is also where Alan asks Cesare how long he will live. And later that night, Alan is also murdered. Someone breaks into Mr. Francis's, breaks the news to Mr. Francis, and like that gets him trying to figure out who did it, and like he starts to like implore the cops to investigate and helps with the investigation. He assumes it's a somnambulist, so he tries to question him. Dr. Caligari is questioned, and he won't wake up Cesare for questioning. Cesare meets Jane later that night, tries to murder her, and then ends up just trying to kidnap her and like molest her and try to kidnap her. And like so her family tries to find her, and then other people try to find her. Then she wakes up after she's found, and it's like, it's Cesare, but like they're like, no, Cesare, it couldn't be Cesare because he was asleep. But it turns out that was a dummy in the like casket bed box thing that he sleeps, the cabinet that he sleeps in. So then they find out that it's a dummy. Dr. Caligari flees, which leads them to the insane asylum, where it turns out Mr. Francis is like, take me to the director of the asylum, and it turns out to be Dr. Caligari, and he's like, what? And then later when Dr. Caligari is asleep, they search his office and they find a book about like literally the same thing that just happened, about a somnambulist and like the murders and all that. And then in his diary they see that like he's really excited that a somnambulist came, and like they could be led to do murder. And then they find Cesare dead in the fields and bring him back to the asylum, where Dr. Caligari is confronted, and then he's put in a cell. And it's like he never leaves his cell. But then it turns out Mr. Francis, we're back at the beginning. Mr. Francis is on the bench again, which reminds me a little bit of the the bench in Forrest Gump. But anyways, he replies that we realize he's actually in an asylum, and he's walking around, and he points out Cesare, he's a sleepwalker, like he's scary, and Cesare's just walking around with flowers or something, and then he implores Jane to marry him again, like this is apparently something he does a lot, and she says that queens like herself are not free to answer the calls of their hearts. And a Dr. Caligari type person, the director, enters the main hall, is attacked by Mr. Francis, and then Mr. Francis is dragged off in a straitjacket to his cell, which is where the movie ends. I would give this like a medium thumbs. I didn't really like it that much. I mean, I get why it's important and how influential it was, but I didn't enjoy the experience of watching it, so I'm going to say thumbs down for that. But thumbs up for aesthetics. So, you know. And those are the two movies, Metropolis and The Count of Dr. Caligari, and that's a little look into German Expressionism.